It seems almost unbelievable that by tomorrow we will have read 2 full books of the Torah since the lockdown. The first Shabbat that Rabbi Igor and I broadcast live was on the 21st of March from the sanctuary, the last time we held our services in an empty synagogue. It was Shabbat Vayakhel Pekudei, the last double Parasha of the book of Exodus. Since then, we have covered the sacrificial and cultic rituals of the priesthood, dwelt on the holiness code and laws of the land in Leviticus, and navigated the Israelites' rebellions in the book of Numbers. Today, or tomorrow rather, we read the last double parasha of Numbers. And although we are beginning to plan our return to the sanctuary towards the end of August, we will be in exile a little longer in Deuteronomy before entering the Promised Land. One of the most striking laws of the last parasha of Numbers concerns the provision of 48 towns to be built for the Levites, the priestly clan, once the Israelites enter the land of Israel. Without any territory assigned to them on account of their priestly status, the Levites are given the cities and surrounding pasture for cattle and other animals to graze. Of the towns that are to be assigned to the Levites, 6 are designated as cities of refuge, in Hebrew, Arei HaMiklat. The Hebrew word miklat means refuge or asylum, and is found only here at the end of Numbers, in Joshua, and in the book of Chronicles, and refers to specific cities where a person guilty of manslaughter can find refuge from anyone seeking to take revenge against the manslayer. The Torah states, "The cities shall serve you as a refuge from the avenger, so that the killer may not die unless he has stood trial before the assembly." We should note several things about this verse. Firstly, the protection is afforded to the one who was guilty of manslaughter, not murder, not an intended assassination, which is dealt with separately in the chapter, but an accidental death, for which there still needs to be a just process of trial and sentence. Secondly, the city would need to absorb the one who has fled, another meaning of the word miklat. Its citizens would have to protect the accidental manslayer and keep the blood avenger from doing any harm. That is quite a responsibility. Indeed, the one who has fled is permitted to remain in the city of refuge, and he must remain the responsibility of the citizens of the town. If the manslayer ventures beyond the limits of the city of refuge, and he encounters the blood avenger and is killed, the Torah states that the citizens bear no guilt on his account. While the manslayer is protected in the city of refuge, the murderer who has struck someone intentionally with a tool of stone or wood that causes death is to be sentenced to death. The Torah, and indeed the Talmud, emphasize the difference between these two killings. One is accidental, the other with an instrument that will inevitably kill the victim. As the Talmud says, Shehabazel may meet b'chol shehu, an iron instrument of any size kills. I mention this because tomorrow will mark the 26th anniversary since the bombing of AMIA, the Asociación Mutual Israelita Argentina, the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires, in which 87 people were murdered and over 100 people injured. The July the 18th, 1994 bombing came 2 years after a car bomb exploded outside the Israeli embassy in Argentina's capital, killing 29 people and injuring 250, including Israeli diplomats, children, clergy from across the street, and passers-by. Despite investigations into both bombings, no one has ever been brought to justice for the murder of the victims. In 1998, Argentina expelled 6 Iranian diplomats from the country following an intercepted call from the Iranian embassy in Argentina that demonstrated that Iran had been involved in the embassy attack, but it was never determined which individuals had been responsible. In the 26 years since the bombing of AMIA, the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires, there has been neglect, wanton mistreatment, and abuse of the case. Incriminating evidence has been burnt, information withheld. There has been poor handling, and charges directed against former presidents of Argentina relating to concealed evidence, abuse of authority, and obstruction of justice. The special prosecutor, Alberto Nisman, on the eve of exposing Iranian leaders who had orchestrated the attacks and names of Hezbollah operatives, as well as Iran's terror cells in South America, was found dead in his apartment, believed to be murdered. There have been trade deals between Iran and Argentina that have included agreements to sweep the AMIA bombing under the carpet. There have been cover-ups and abuse of power. And all this, in the words of the federal judge, Claudio Banadio, to the detriment of justice, the victims, and punishment of the accused. Justice for those victims has been thwarted. It was Alexander Solzhenitsyn in his Gulag Archipelago who wrote, "In keeping silent about evil, in burying it so deep within us that no sign of it appears on the surface, we are implanting it, and it will rise up 1,000-fold in the future. When we neither punish nor reproach evildoers," he says, "we are not simply protecting their trivial old age. We are thereby ripping the foundations of justice from beneath new generations." When individuals of another faith criticize the Hebrew Bible and its idea of God as purely a God of justice, in contrast to the God of love in the Greek Bible, in the New Testament, I want to say firstly that they are wrong, that there are hundreds of references in the Hebrew Bible to a God of love, compassion, loving kindness, patience, and forgiveness. But secondly, I would want to add, yes, our God is a God of justice, and you cannot have love without justice. For injustice is repellent. Injustice should cause us outrage and indignation. It should prompt us towards action that counters the abuse of power, the restrictions of freedom, dishonesty and corruption, and the uneven distribution of wealth. How have the victims of the embassy and AMIA bombings been vindicated? What about their lives and the lives of the surviving families? Justice would have gone some way towards mitigating the trauma of loss or injury. The Argentinian Jewish community was massively changed after 1994. The grief and anger are still palpable as the perpetrators elude justice. This Shabbat, the Shabbat on which we read about the Arei Miklat, the cities of refuge, and about justice served, let us remember the victims of the bomb attacks in Buenos Aires. Justice is vital to all societies, and failure to pursue justice shatters the very foundations of the society in which we live. The Torah teaches firmly this lesson, that we can only thrive when we live by its moral imperative to pursue justice. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof. Justice, justice shall you pursue. Amen.